Hey, welcome to the Kingdoms Podcast. My name is Luke and I host this with my buddy Matt Ma. And our goal is to empower you to discover how your faith impacts culture for God's kingdom. To do that, we're sitting down with different men and women from all kinds of disciplines to uncover how they, through their ambitions and vocational skill set, make a difference in the lives of those around them. And so if this is helpful to you, we'd love it if you could like it, share it, and subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy today's episode. Hey friends, I'm Luke and I'm glad that you're with us today for this episode. I'm joined by Tom Miyakawa, a friend and an excellent teacher. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so excited about this.
No, it's going to be good. Tom serves as an adjunct professor at Butler University and Taylor University, both of which are in Indianapolis. And I've just invited him to be with us today to hear his heart on what it means to be people who follow Jesus, especially as we share our stories with others, and also as we consider what kingdom ambition looks like. So, Tom, I want to just launch off by saying, can you share with us a bit more about who you are, what you do, and maybe one thing about you that most people wouldn't know?
Okay. All right. Well, let's see. So my name is Tom Miyakawa, as Luke said, and I live in Indiana. A little bit of my background is that I grew up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and my father was a physics professor there. So I'm half Japanese because my dad came from Japan, only child. So you don't need to know the whole story, but and I went on in the academic realm and got a bachelor's degree from Purdue University in math and statistics, and then I went and got my master's degree from Texas A&M. Met my wife there in that same program. She's a statistician as well. So that's our
first sight.
Academic professional background. And then, so then I worked for a company, Eli Lilly and Company in Indianapolis for 20 years as a research scientist, statistician, mathematician type person. And then, and then God called us over to Thailand as missionaries for the last 10 years, and we just returned last summer back to Indiana here. So we're in kind of a gap year situation now, but so let's see, you asked me about something that people wouldn't know about.
Yeah,
okay,
something fun people might not know.
No, this is great. I knew this would be fun. I'm a huge sports junkie.
Okay.
So some people know that about me. Trivia, I've got all the way back into the 60s and 70s. And I've got a huge, I kept all of my cards from when I was a kid. And
right
so I've got all that going on there. Something else that's kind of interesting is, as I think about it, I have trouble, Luke, following stories, like fictional things. So it's just kind of something that people don't know about me. But so when my kids were growing up, if we ever went to a movie, and it was something that, if it's a true story, I'm kind of with it,
Right.
So, but if it's fictional and it's one of that genre of movies, like it wouldn't be long into the movie when one of my 10 or 12-year-old kids would go, Dad, you probably weren't following that, and then they would have to explain it to me.
So like the Marvel Avengers series, you're like, what is going on?
Yeah, and so I always feel like, oh boy, I'm going to be exposed because I didn't pick up on that or whatever it is. So
No. The good news is, as a mathematician and statistician, or statistician, I should say, your ability to navigate logic and carefully document exact information is probably off the charts. So
it's definitely a right brain, left brain thing because and so that's what I always tell people is if you have a weakness in one area, that means something good in another area. Definitely it's the way God wired us. So yeah.
Fair. No, that's beautiful. Well, hey, Tom, thank you for sharing some of those things with us. I'd love to talk with you a little bit about evangelism. I know that's actually how our paths first crossed when I was a missionary kid in Thailand and you were serving there, as you creating different opportunities for young people to be discipled, but also to share their faith with others. I'm really intrigued to know, how did you first just become a follower of Jesus Christ? And since then, what have you found to be some of the most effective ways of sharing your faith with others?
Yeah. So, wow, that's a great story. It's incredible. I mean, even as I think about sharing what God has done in my life and how my life has the path that it's taken, I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful. And so, what happened was was when I was growing up, I didn't go to church, didn't have parents that talked about it, or my dad came from a Buddhist culture, and my mother was definitely atheist, for sure. So I never heard much about it, but I was the proverbial neighborhood kid that got invited to like the VBS. So I had a Mennonite church right across the street from my house. And I think I was 7 when I got first invited to a VBS when I heard about Jesus for the first time. And it was around that time there was another CEF, Child Evangelism Fellowship, summer thing in somebody's garage, and they invited me to that, and I went because it was fun and Kool-Aid and whatever the attraction was in the summer. But I think I went to that VBS then 4 summers in a row.
Okay.
Luke, I remember it vividly,
Mm.
like the songs we sang. I remember reading in the Gospels some of the stories. Didn't
Yeah.
it didn't take root from the standpoint of like I didn't get saved right then and there. But then when I got into high school, my basketball coach, JV basketball coach, we always recited the Lord's Prayer before our games, public school.
Wow.
You could do that back then. I was involved with a wonderful family of a pastor,
Hmm.
who they just kind of shepherded my life through my high school years,
Yeah.
and God used them. And then when I got to college at Purdue, I still wasn't, looking to follow God or anything like that. But I was in a fraternity, and I had 3 guys in my fraternity that we called them the God Squad because they were always like doing the right thing.
Uh-huh.
And I watched them, and I was curious for sure, and I respected them. And so, and then I had probably 1 or 2 visits, like crew type people that came to my apartment or my dorm when I was in college. And so when I got to grad school in 1987, and I met my wife now, and she was a very strong, believing Christian person. But I'd never heard of this before. She went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night. There was a Bible study on campus on Tuesday night and a devotional Thursday, and like, whoa, wait a second.
Just like
So I
all
think
in.
but when I met her, it clicked, and I could see the hand of God through all of these different people in my life, that they all had planted seeds.
Mm.
And I don't know if you know. So there's an author by the name of Mark Cahill, who
Hmm.
is just a great guy, and he wrote a book called "One Thing You Can't Do in Heaven," which is a very popular book. And the thing that he says in there is that the average person, when they accept Christ, they've heard the gospel on average like 7.2 times. Now,
Okay.
I'm a statistician,
Right.
so I know that it probably isn't 7.2 exactly, and where is the scientific studies behind that and the whole thing. But the point is, it's around 7.
Mm.
Might be 5, it might be 9. And as I looked at my life, Luke, I counted the number of different times, including I went to basketball camp when I was 15 at Taylor University, and I
Mm.
heard the gospel pretty much every night in some form. And we had a little devotional for 5 minutes with 5 or 6 guys, and I'd never really done that before. So that was weird, but I kind of liked it. So all these different things, touches that God had put through different people in my lives, and I counted it, and it was either 7 or 8. And I
There
was
you
like,
go.
this is me. Like, this is exactly me. I heard the gospel at 7 or 8 times, and I was ready.
Yeah.
So, none of those people were the one.
Mm.
And you can't even point to any one of those in particular and say that was it. And what they said and the words they said, boy, that really convicted me. No, it was greater than that. It was God working through all of these different people.
Mm.
And then I was ready to read the Bible and accept Jesus. And I'm getting goosebumps as I talk about this because it's just amazing. And I've been able to go back to each one of those people and say, do you remember? I mean, I went back to the Mennonite church,
Wow.
and I had like 2 minutes to share. Literally, it was like, And I said, 37 years ago, you shared the gospel of Jesus Christ with me in summer Bible school, vacation Bible school. And I just wanted to thank you. And there were 2 or 3 teachers who were in their like 70s and 80s. And I pointed them out in the church and said, thank you. 37 years ago, you did this for me. And I'm so grateful to you and to the Lord that you started this in me and that God took over my life. So,
Wow.
so that's what happened for me. And I realized what people had done. And therefore, when I became a Christian, I knew what the rest of my life was going to be about, doing the same
Yeah.
thing. It's just planting seeds. And so, so that's kind of the idea, is that God, that's the way God works. And so that's kind of my story.
That's
And
beautiful.
so, the different forms that it's taken on, it's all over the board and it's wonderful. So I have enjoyed doing like what people would call street evangelism for about almost 20 years now.
Yeah.
And I was invited to do it. I was scared to death. If anybody's thinks something that's not so positive when you even hear those words, street evangelism, what I found real quickly was the first time I went down there, I was talking with some people and I was very surprised at their response. Like they seemed to enjoy the conversations. And I called my wife on my way home and I said, honey, I can't believe this is like the most exhilarating thing I've ever done. And so I started going down to the bar area of Indianapolis every Saturday night for about 2.5 years before we left for Thailand, Luke, 10 years ago. And talking to people and got in a rhythm of that. And literally I would look back, no Saturday night was ever the same, but I could see people would say things like, they'd even say things like, as we walked away from each other, they'd say, thank you. Like, I don't believe what you do, but I appreciate you being down here. They would say things like that. And I was like, really? So, so I realized it was helping people. And my style is just to get to know people and, because I care about them and ask them a lot of questions. And then some crazy things can happen out of that, So, I'll just tell the story one night of what happened with Caleb. So can I tell a quick story?
Yeah, do it. Stories are great.
Okay.
Hit us.
So I was down there one night and I was with this guy. I remember it vividly. He was selling wristbands and he had just moved from California. His name was Shannon and he's probably about 20, 21. And I said, Shannon, so he goes, what do you do down here? And I said, well, I'm actually just down here, like sharing my faith with people and I want them to know Jesus. And he goes, no. He goes, I don't want to talk to you, man. Like this, I have no interest in that. I'm an atheist and I would never believe that stuff. And I'm like, hey, Shannon, that's cool. Like I appreciate you sharing, where you're at. And, it's been great talking with you, man. I hope you have a really great night tonight, like selling stuff and, and all that. And here's my card. If you ever need anything, just let me know. And he's like, that's cool. So that was it. Like he wasn't interested. And then, but like I turned and I walked over and about 20 feet away, there were 4 guys sitting on the wall there. And I walked by and I stopped and I said, hey, what's up? And this guy said, what's up with you? And I said, where are you guys from? And the guy said, we're from Houston. And these other guys are from Chicago, I think. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm a Christian. And the guy looked at me and his eyes bugged out. And I just knew, like the Spirit on the spot told me what to say. And I said, because when I said I'm a Christian, he literally leaned forward in his eye, and I said, do you want to become a Christian like tonight, like right now? And he looked at me and he goes, yes.
Wow.
And so I led him to the Lord right on the spot. This was Caleb. And then the funny thing was, and you could tell like something had happened to him. And then the guy right next to him, he goes, about 5 minutes later, he's just sitting there. And I'm wondering, what are these other 3 guys thinking? And he goes, what about me? And so I let him by the spot. So it's just a really great example of here, I'm the same person, but here's Shannon. And he had no interest, in fact, get out of my face type of person. And I was like, hey, that's cool. But these other two guys were ready, and it wasn't anything that I said. I like said nothing. But as it turned out, the one guy's grandmother had almost led him to Christ. And so the next person that was going to come in his way, he was going to say yes. And so he became a Christian right there. And so did the other guy,
Hmm.
you know. So again, the whole idea is if a person has heard the gospel 4 times, or let's say 2 times, and if I'm in his life and I don't share the gospel, Luke, the way the numbers work, like the 7.2 thing,
Yeah.
if I don't share the gospel, then he's still at 2.
Mm.
And he may be still at 2 for the next 10 years, and he's not moving closer to Jesus because he's still stuck at 2 because no one took the time to say anything. But if I say something, then now this person moved from 2 to 3. And there's a momentum there. And then the next time a person will move him to 4. And he's
Right.
getting closer to that 7 or 8.
Right.
So all of a sudden now we have a new purpose in life.
Mhm.
Is that people are all around us, and we wish that the number was on their head. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
there's a 6 right there. I call that 6. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I literally can thank every person. God, thank you for putting each person that led me to the next person that led me to the next person that said, when I'm 23 years old, and any one of those people could have been discouraged because I didn't respond,
Mm.
until later.
Yeah.
But I can see it all. It was a story that God was putting together. And so what do? We just have to be faithful with moving the numbers.
Yeah.
And letting God take care of people's hearts.
Yeah, man, absolutely. That's a sweet story. That's both sweet and also man, really inspiring. I think, I think when you say that, what it makes me realize is how valuable it is to say, Lord, would you keep, putting people in my life who are just available to talk, just open to have some sort of conversation, because I trust that you'll use my presence in their lives to move them, one rung higher on the ladder, if you will, or one step closer.
Mm-hmm.
Man, and that's so
Exactly.
motivating because, man, so many people have been in your teacher's shoes or in your shoes, right? Just being faithful to share, faithful to teach,
Yeah.
faithful to disciple. When you talk
Yeah.
about, when you talk about that faithfulness or that commitment, I think about the fact that you've shared with me multiple times about John Piper and the influence his ministry has had on you, and how you specifically deeply resonated with his sermon, and I think the book that came out after, Don't Waste Your Life. And I'd love to hear a little bit from you, Tom, just how has that message shaped your sense of calling and your sense of mission as a follower of Jesus?
Wow. Yeah. So, that's a big one. I can't say anything, Luke. Like, I just can't talk now. No, just kidding. It's such a big one. So 2003, we were on a mission trip from our church. This is way before we had even thought about being missionaries at some point. Yeah. So, but we were headed to Hungary on a mission trip, teaching English and coaching basketball there at a Word of Life camp in Hungary. So somebody, the guy that led our trip, Stephen, gave me that book. And so I read it on the trip, like on the plane. And that is like a deadly combination, like being on a mission trip and reading Don't Waste Your Life. But it literally changed the trajectory of my life, and I would say our family's life. So the main premise of it is just that it starts out with a story. It talks about John Piper's dad, who was a really great preacher. And there was a man that came up to the front of the church, and he was like in his late 70s, and he was crying, he was weeping, and he comes up to the front of the church and he says over and over and over the same thing. And like, is he dying? What's he saying? And why is he crying? And he's old, and and so on. And he kept saying the same thing over and over. I wasted it. I wasted it. I wasted it. And so you read the first part of the book, and the rest of it is, how we basically that can happen for any Christian. So if you're happen to be listening to this now and you're 40 years old, or you're 20 years old, or 15 or whatever, basically the premise is it is easy for North American Christian people to kind of follow a normal path of Christianity, whatever that looks like. They're normal things that you do. You go to church, whatever it is. And get to the end of your life following that path and realizing only then I wasted it. I wasted it.
Hmm.
And so, I was very comfortable in my corporate setting, in my career. My kids were doing great. We were soccer parents. My wife was homeschooling. Life was good. Life was really good. But I looked at that story and I thought, that's me. Like, I could easily work the kind of expected 30 years, retire, have a nice retirement, financially be set, the whole thing. And then go into retirement, because that's what people do, right? That's kind of like the American dream. But then I was like, that's me. Like, I could easily just follow this out and get to the end and regret it. And so I didn't know what that meant, but I do know this. I don't know if I'm just going to ask you, have you seen The Chosen yet?
I've not.
Okay, so I won't spoil it, but it's basically there's obviously it's the gospel when Jesus calls people to something. He called the disciples to a different life. So we have a choice right there. We either say, yes, and we follow him, or we say, no, I need to go back and bury my dad. Whatever the excuse is, or we just flat out say no. But life is a series, ultimately, when it boils down to it, of opportunities to say yes to God, to say yes, Lord, over and over and over. That's it, and it's awesome. But so I didn't know what that meant when I read the book. All I knew was that I had to say, are you open? Are you willing to follow me wherever that leads you and whatever that means, at whatever cost it is? That was the question when I read that, because I didn't want to waste my life. So it was kind of a selfish thing in the beginning. Like, I don't want to waste my life. I don't want to stand before God and hope that he says, well done, good and faithful servant, and then realize that no one told me that I was on the wrong path. But I was living for myself and I wasn't truly living for him. That doesn't mean that you have to not work a secular job. It doesn't mean that you have to change anything, really. But I knew that meant, was I willing to say yes to the Lord?
Yeah.
Okay. And I did, and I wanted to say yes, whatever that means. And so the next thing I knew was that my wife were sitting down, and we wrote a letter of intent. Luke, you probably don't know this, and we said, because we said, if God calls us into missions, like moving our family of 5 to another place in the world, we don't know where or when or what, we want to do that. We want to say yes to God. And so we wrote a letter out, a letter of intent. We gave it to the missions pastor at our church and said, if God calls us somewhere for 6 to 12 months, because I still had my job and career, we weren't saying we're going to sell everything right now and just wait. But we had enough wisdom to say, we're just going to kind of put the fleece out there. And we wrote it out and said, and then we gave it to them. And we said, we don't know what this means, but we want to serve the Lord wherever he wants us to be, or go, or stay here right where we are. We don't know.
Yeah.
And so we got that out there. And then about a year later, we heard about the opportunity in Chiang Mai.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So highlight that. Yeah. What did that opportunity look like?
So, I don't have a seminary degree, and, I didn't know that people could be involved in missions and be missionaries without being a pastor or going out to a village, and all that kind of thing. Now, I am kind of a natural evangelist in that I just have a heart for people, but I didn't have any formal training or any of that. So my wife said, well, what are we going to do? Okay, so we if God calls us to be missionaries, what are we going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. But we, again, God thing, totally. I think as soon as we say, yes, Lord, that starts a chain reactions of things potentially, or at least God knows we're open and we're available. And then he starts to work. The Holy Spirit starts to work when we say that. And again, it doesn't mean that we're going to move overseas necessarily. In fact, it may mean nothing different. But for us, as soon as we said that, it wasn't but 6 months later when I was at a missions conference in Milwaukee, and there happened to be, I was at a men's conference, men's ministry, and there happened to be a missions forum going on that weekend, and there was a table there that said either Southeast Asia or Thailand, and there was a brochure on the table that said Grace International School. And I took it back to my wife and I said, I found this brochure and it's opportunities to teach. And she looked at me and she had this huge smile on her face. And I kind of knew right then, we're probably going to go to Thailand. Because she was all in and she saw all the reasons why I could be a teacher. I don't have an education degree, but I do have a math background. So the stars were aligning. God was putting it into place. We had no idea what that meant. But as soon as we said generically, yes, Lord, to begin with, it wasn't but less than a year later, we kind of knew he was sending us to Thailand.
Wow.
So that's how that came about.
That's sweet, man. Because what you're saying, when you highlight saying, life is a series of opportunities to say yes to God.
Totally.
We're giving up control and saying, I'm saying yes to God and I'm not sure what this could look like. But at the same time, we're also saying yes to just incredible kingdom purpose and what God would invite us into.
And you just got to see life that way because, again, I grew up, I didn't know the power of God in any sense, stretch, an ounce of what that meant. But I've seen it now for 30 years and it's amazing. Yeah. And every year gets better. So if I'm a young person and I look back at what God has done, when I came to Christ, I was 23. I had no idea what God was going to do explosively for the next 30 years. And now I'm in my mid 50s. I can't wait, if I have 20 more years to live or 40 or 2, I can't wait to see what he's going to do next because every year seems like it's just gotten better and better.
Yeah.
So it's not like flattening the curve. It doesn't go up and then you kind of get older and then, you settle in and retire. No, just your faith grows all along the journey. And so you see God doing more and more and you realize I had nothing to do with this, and God just went all over it. And so literally the possibilities get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the more people that that are in the faith, the same thing is true. You start realizing God can do anything with the rest of my life. God can do anything with my life. God can do anything with the rest of my life. Let's strap the seatbelt in because you're going on a roller coaster ride. It's going to be incredible. And as long as we're, open to God, whatever you want. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Small thing. Yes, Lord. I'm sitting in the foyer of my church talking with somebody. I'm realizing God is calling me right now to stay in this conversation for another half an hour because this person is really hurting. That's a yes, Lord moment.
Yeah.
I have to make that decision as long as this person wants to talk to me because they're really sharing their heart now. We were going to go to lunch, but yes, Lord, if we're willing to do that with small things and big things, what do you want to do with my life? Then the doors just keep swinging wide open. And so that's what happened when we went to Thailand. And but that's definitely the way God works. He's incredible. I don't know what he's going to do the rest of this day, but I'm super excited about it.
Yeah.
Because God is God.
And it starts with saying yes.
Yeah.
Saying yes. Wow. Tom, have you ever been just amazed or surprised with some of the ways you've seen God use you to influence others for his kingdom? And if you have a couple stories you could highlight.
Yeah. How I feel like I'm being surprised all the time. But let me say one more thing about the Don't Waste Your Life book, because that took us basically out of my corporate job that I'd had for 20 years and moved us. We had some really wonderful, well-meaning people. When we made that transition, or when God called us into missions and away from the corporate world, because the company that I worked for 20 years, Eli Lilly, is an amazing company. It's a kind of company where people, especially from the Midwest, especially from Indiana, once the saying is, once you hire with Lilly, you hire for life, because they just will take care of you. You'll have a good job. Financially, it's a very sweet deal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so when we left Lilly, I was leaving the corporate world.
Yeah.
And so people said, what are you doing? you're giving this all up, and things like that. So another thing that was in the book that was really good was this, and this does kind of touch back into the whole evangelism piece. And maybe there's even a couple things here. One point he makes is, if you live your life well and do it for the glory of God, but in doing so, don't actually, like, how do we love people the most? We love people the most in the end. The biggest need that people have is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So, like, if I do things for people to serve them or do ministry or whatever, but in the process, I'm not pointing them to Jesus, then I'm actually not loving them. Because maybe I'm trying to do it for them, or maybe even my motives are very mixed, and I'm actually wanting to do something that makes me feel good or something like that too. And I think there's always a mixed bag of motivation when we do things, and I don't think we should beat ourselves up if we feel like, there's a little piece of this that it's a win-win. It's a win for this person or this ministry, and it makes me feel good, and it's just really the way that God has wired me or whatever. I don't think that's wrong. But we need to make sure that whatever we're doing, in some sense, we're pointing people to Christ, because that is what they need the most. And that's what I learned from that book. So it just means we're a little more intentional. It means we're a little more deliberate about the message that we bring alongside anything that we're doing. And so Don't Waste Your Life has said, make sure that in your correspondence, make sure when you have a great lunch conversation with somebody, if it's appropriate, make sure that you pray with them at the end and you connect them to the power of Christ somehow. Make sure in a casual conversation, again, if you feel like you're meeting somebody where they are and you can say, how can I pray for you? Like, make sure and take advantage of those opportunities. Don't squander them to point people to Jesus, and think about that in everything that you do. So that was another thing that I got from that book that was really good. And the final thing was, what orbits do I spend a lot of my time? Because a lot of us, time is our biggest resource. It's the most valuable thing that we have resource-wise that God has given us, is our time. What are we doing with that? And I'm a sports nut. So, like, I literally can sit and watch Sports Center or old videos of games of this and that, like, I could, but I have to fast forward to the end of my life. Life is very short. That's another thing that you kind of get from that book, or that thought of Don't Waste Your Life, is we think that we're going to live forever, and we're not. And life is actually very short. Man, the years they fly by. So how am I spending my time? And, do I want to have on my gravestone, this is kind of, I'm making light of it, but like, here lies Tom Miyakawa, spent 23,782 hours watching Sports Center, like,
Right.
or talking about sports or something like that. No, I don't want to have that on my tombstone. I want to have something about, made a difference for Christ, if he allows me to, or something like that. I want something to have eternal impact that's remembered about me. But I could easily lose a lot of my time in life just by doing things that I enjoy doing that aren't for the kingdom and have eternal value. So don't waste your life. So that spoke to me very much at that time. I played golf. I played some golf. And I thought, golf takes like, if you play 18 holes, it takes like 5 hours to play golf. And if you do it routinely, sure, if there's other benefit and maybe fellowship with other people, or you're relationally trying to build or something, but a lot of it is you're just enjoying yourself, And so I cut golf out. Like, literally 15 years ago, I've played like 3 or 4 rounds of golf. That's it. And I don't really have any desire to go back. So, and I'm not that good anyway, but that's just a good example, is just to think about it. Like, how am I spending my time? Am I investing in people? And so today, what I try to do is just look at all the relationships in my life and try to use and invest in people. I'm on Facebook a lot. I want to encourage other people with the time that I have, because this may be my last day. So anyway, that was another impact from the book for sure, is using our time well.
Well, which is super valuable. But when you mentioned like the word impact, yeah, are there any examples you would point to where you could say, uh, and here's someone, in my life that I've seen this impact, whether it's sharing the gospel with them and them coming to know Jesus Christ, or even on the discipleship front?
Yeah, so I think of two people right away. One is Steve Allen. Hey, I actually sat it next to me. So Steve Allen, I'll just start with this. This is Steve's new book. Steve discipled me. Just think about this, Luke. Steve discipled me. I had just become a Christian, 1988. I'm sitting here. This is a new life for me. My eyes are wide open. Like, what does it mean to be a Christian? I didn't know. I didn't know. So but Steve and I sat down over breakfast, over coffee. We probably met once a week for a number of months, and Steve would just share with me his life. And so I'm learning from Steve, and whatever he's saying, I'm kind of believing because I don't know otherwise, right? So what I learned from Steve was that, what do? Well, you meet with other believers. You spend time with people. You invest in them. You don't just go to church and maybe a Bible study or something. Like, you literally are. And I like the way, Matthew 28 puts it, by when Jesus says, go make disciples. And what I think that really means is baptizing them and teaching them all the things, But what I think what that really means is go make disciples, new disciples, and make better disciples. So we are to help each other. And I think about my men's group, Luke, which is another great example. Steve was involved in the life of other men. So I'm watching Steve going, oh, okay, that's what you do. So for 30 years now, there's rarely been a week that's passed by where I haven't been involved in a group of men meeting at a coffee shop. And the group that I'm in now, me and two other guys, God put us together in 2005, January of 2005. The same group has been meeting for 15 years of men.
Wow. Yeah.
10, 12 guys consistently over 15 years. If you do the math, every week. Of course, we were in Thailand for 10 of those years, so I missed a lot of it. But that same group, and now I'm back. If you do the math, that means that we've met over 700 times.
Yeah.
So, and
that's formative.
We've only missed 2 times because of snow, but otherwise we've met. So you're doing life with these men. I learned that from Steve. This is normal. It is normal to meet with another group of guys to talk about the Bible and to talk about our lives and to be accountable to each other. So if you and I were meeting, or we were in the same group, Luke, for maybe 10 minutes, we'd break out and you and I would talk, and you would ask me and I would ask you, tell me about your week. How was your walk with the Lord? And then there would be one question I would ask you, so tell me how I can pray for you this next week and hold you accountable. And then what question do you want me to ask you next Wednesday when we get back together? And so your life, and the things that you're struggling with, or the things where you need prayer about. You're going to tell me, here's the one question I want you to ask you about. It might be I want you to ask me how I treated my wife, or how I listened to her during the week when she had something she was kind of excited to tell me about, because last week I did terrible with it. I just kind of wanted her to finish up and move on to the next thing on my list. I did a terrible job. Can you ask me about that next week? So you and I would do that. And so here's a group of guys who have been meeting for 15 years, and we know we want to do this for the next 15 years. But it all started back with Steve, because Steve was meeting with guys and things like that. And so Steve is one guy that and the other thing about this, I just got to say, here's Steve. Luke, he's in year 5 of, he found out 5 years ago that he has Lou Gehrig's disease.
Wow.
He's got ALS, and they gave him 2 to 5 years to live. And he's in year 5 now. And he's in a wheelchair, but he is an amazing, amazing, inspirational guy. And I've been watching Steve. So my advice to anybody is go up, keep going up, find people in your life that you look up to, that will be a mentor to you, find them and just latch on and follow them for 30 years. We don't
And
put trust in men. We don't put trust in people. And the other quick example I'll just give is, because it's a little bit on the other end of the spectrum, is Charles Smith. So Charles Smith is like 96 now, but he continues to meet with other men one-on-one. I think it was about 10 years ago, Charles met with my son, who was 15 then, and they met like every other Tuesday for like 6 months. And Charles just poured out his life. So here's my son who's 15 with this guy who's like 85. And Charles continues to do it to this day at age 96. And that gives me a vision. Like Steve gave me an example or pattern to follow 30 years ago. And now I see Charles and I think, I want to be like Charles. You know, I want to use whatever I have left, finish strong, and invest in people. And really, because I can say I want to invest in people. We can all say that. Like we want to disciple other people or invest in the kingdom or invest in people's lives. But it really boils down to, look at my calendar over a week, right? I'm either meeting with people or I'm not. So, so those would be two men that I would go back to and say, wow, I can't even put into words the impact of seeing people, not reading it in a book, but actually seeing it in people that God has put in my life to follow.
Yeah. Really quick mentioning, speaking of books, can you just mention for those who will take this in just an audio format, the name of Steve Allen's book?
Yeah. So Steve Allen's book is, it's called And He Ran for 40 Days.
And He Ran for 40 days.
Yep. Steve Allen. And the subtitle is Kingdom Treasures from the Life of Elijah and My Personal Battle with ALS.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's in Colorado Springs now. And
thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. Tom, we talked a lot about both evangelism and discipleship and seeing God work in sweet ways and calling you and your family to Thailand for a decade. And there's a lot of excitement in that. But I know for many people listening, they realize what you and I realize is that amidst that, there can be real times of loss or difficulty or suffering. And I just wanted to ask, have you seen God work, or even just God show his faithfulness to you in the face of times of opposition or suffering?
Yeah. Wow. So let me start with today. So I think, we just came back from Thailand, spent 10 years there. I'm almost going to tear up here. It's getting nicer here. It's not wintertime anymore, like up where you are as well. So things are a little bit better from that standpoint. But like in the midst of the wintertime, when it was cold and windy and blustery and the whole thing, and I miss Thailand.
Yeah.
So I miss the relationships there. I can't believe, I honestly can't believe that God has used me, period. Like, I don't deserve it. I don't deserve his grace every day. I don't deserve the different things. I just can't believe what God has done in my life, in spite of me. And, I know myself. I know my thoughts. I know my motives. Like, we know ourselves very well, don't we? And so, like, in spite of all of that, God has done some, so the whole Thailand experience for 10 years, it was like being in a candy store, and you're a kid and like, you mean this and this, and you're looking all around. And I absolutely love the people that, like you, that we knew in Thailand, that we became friends with, became very close with. You do life together. So being back has been very hard.
Yeah.
From one standpoint, just because we're not in Thailand. Now, this is our home where we live now in Indiana. So we've been here a long time. We have lots of friends, the whole thing, but I miss it a lot, and it's not been easy.
Yeah.
But I will say this, I got one other thing I want to share that too, is I go back to Psalm 138:8 is amazing. And it just basically says that God's telling us in that verse, I have a purpose for your life and I will fulfill it. So you think about what could be better, like having everything that we want in this life, and life suddenly is over and you realize, I got everything I wanted to. That sounds okay or pretty good, but think about this thought. God had a plan for me. He gave me skills, abilities, relationships, all of these different things to fulfill that plan, education. He put me in this place. He gave me this marriage, whatever it is. He gave me all these things and he had a plan. And at the end of our lives, realizing God carried it out perfectly.
Mm.
There wasn't anything that I wasn't able to do with the plan that he gave me. He didn't allow me to live a different plan or somebody else's plan. The plan he gave for me, he completely carried out. I can see it now. He fulfilled it in every way. Like,
Yeah.
there's no better thought,
Yeah.
right?
There's no better.
So
Yeah.
there's no better thought than God has a plan for you and he's going to fulfill it. I mean, he makes that promise in Romans 8:28, in Philippians 1:6, 1:12, 1:6 in the first chapter there. He fulfills it in Psalm 138:8, where he's saying to us, I have a plan and I'm going to carry it out in your life. So on days when I feel like, oh, I messed this up, or I got frustrated with something, or maybe we think there's some major way we've kind of gotten off track. But no, God's saying, it's like you're making it about you. Don't do that. Like, I'm going to do this. You can believe it, you can trust it, you can know it. As much as we think things were a bit different in our lives, or I wish I have regrets about this, no. Like God's saying, I'm actually going to use this. I'm going to use all of it in a way that says your life was perfect, like, because I did it. So that's very helpful. It was very helpful a couple months ago when I was in a really dark season of like, I wish we were back in Thailand, or something, like I was really down, and then I would read a verse like that and just think, oh, God's going to do this, and I just have to trust in that. So
Yeah.
that would be one thing. But then I've had two near-death experiences
Wow.
that, like, from on paper, like, been very traumatic and very difficult. So, but not with God,
Mm.
not with God, because he's so faithful. So, I think you knew that I was in the hospital in Chiang Mai, Thailand. I had a 50-50 chance to live because I had what's called obstructed bowel. So that was one experience I had, where literally it was a 50-50 shot at age 52 of making it to the next week. So that
Wow.
was one. But actually another one, Luke, was I was doing evangelism one night, and I'll tell this quickly, but and I'd finished up. It was about 12:30 at night. I was in the club area of Indianapolis, and I was walking back to my car, and all of a sudden I looked up, and I was talking to my wife on my cell phone, and all of a sudden I looked up, and there were four guys with ski masks right in front of me, and two of them had guns. And all
Whoa.
of a sudden I got hit in the head, and I collapsed because I got punched, and I fell to the ground. And then all of a sudden they were picking me back up, and I got hit again, and I fell again. And like, when you get hit like that with that much force, you just kind of collapse. It's like getting
Yeah.
knocked out or something.
Man.
And so I got picked up, and then these four guys with a ski mask on were carrying me somewhere, and they were yelling at me, and the guy had a gun to my head. And in that moment, and this is crazy, my wife was listening to the whole thing on the phone. So
Man.
she knew this is bad. But and I think when it was all said and done, I had like 6 or 7 welts on my head from places I had gotten hit or punched, or whatever. And the guy was one of the guys that, like, the most aggressive guy, was like screaming at me and swearing at me, like, what's wrong with you? And like, literally, you got a gun to your head. So I'd never experienced that before.
No.
And like, you don't know until you get into that situation what's going to come out, or how you're going to feel, or whatever. You just don't know. And the most amazing thing happened. You talk about being surprised by God. Like, in that moment, I felt the most peace I've ever felt in my life. Like, literally what I was thinking was, I may not make it. And we were about ready to move to Thailand. This is about 10 years ago. And I thought, we're probably not going to Thailand now
Oh, wow.
because I'm probably not going to make it tonight with the way this is going right now. But I was filled with this amazing sense of God's peace.
Yeah.
Amazing. I know that God has saved me. I know that my destination is heaven.
Yeah.
And I'm actually really excited about that. Like, I try to think about heaven a lot and like what it's going to be like, because the better you see that picture and think about it, it's right around the corner. So like, but I've been thinking, I read the book from Randy Alcorn called Heaven. And like, here I am in this moment with a gun to my head going, you know what? I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this because I know where I'm going. I'm going to be with the Lord someday. It might be tonight, but I'm going to heaven. So I have no doubts about what's going to happen here. And I'm so okay with this. And so the guy goes, what's wrong with you? You blankety blank blank. And literally what came out of my mouth was, I said, all I know is that I trust my God. That's what came out of me. And he said it again about another minute later. And I said, all I know, and I said it this calmly, all I know is that I trust my God. And he didn't like that answer. So like, he punched me again, and but literally I wasn't faking it. Like, God took over.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about being surprised, like God just takes over. His Spirit takes over in situations that are the scariest in life. I learned that night. And then when I was in the hospital in Thailand, same thing, like, I'm okay with this. God's in control, and whatever he does is the best thing. It's perfect. And yeah. So
wow. Really quick, what happened to the guys in the ski masks? Did they just leave you on the side of the road?
yeah. So we turned the corner and I saw there was a car there, and there were two other guys, and suddenly the car door opened, and I realized right then, and I got hit then. I went back. I still have scars like on my knees from that night. It was a long time ago, and all of a sudden I realized they were starting to push me in the back seat, and there were two other guys waiting for me to grab me. There were 6 guys, probably a gang thing, and they were starting to push me in the car, and I realized like I hadn't physically, I hadn't put up any kind of resistance at all. But I think just the sense of that wouldn't be good if I get in the car.
No, sir.
So,
In light of what's
so
happened.
I put my arms out and I resisted, and then he hit me again. And, so I fought a little bit just to try to not go in the car or get shoved in the car. And then all of a sudden, and again, this is a miracle. All of a sudden, I was at the side of the car, and then before I knew it, I was at the back of the car. And all the other 5 guys were in the car, and it was me and this guy, and he was still holding onto my shirt, which he had had the whole time. He was like yanking me and so on. And then I realized it was just me and him. He had a gun, but this was my best chance. And so literally somehow he let go. And then I realized like there was some space between us of maybe a foot. And I literally like just started wailing, with my arms. And then I just dashed, and I ran as hard as I could, as fast as I can away. And I heard the car tires screeching, and so they were off, and I was running in the other direction. And the funny thing was, we got to Thailand 2 weeks later for the first time. We were moving to Thailand, and I still had a black eye. So like I had to tell people like, hey, my wife and I are doing okay. I
actually just got mugged.
So but anyway,
Wow.
That's what happened. So
Wow.
God got me out of that and gave me another day.
Wow. That is incredible. I'd never heard that story from you. And certainly like, I don't think there's many people who can say they've had a gun to their head and not only had that spiritual encounter with God in the midst of it, but then 2 weeks later said, all right, Lord, here we are. We're into this next season of what you've called us into. So, wow.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
Robin was on the phone, and she said the last thing she heard on the phone was put him in the trunk. And I think that's how I got to the back, but, and then the phone went dead.
Oh no. And then you showed up at home 20 minutes later.
Yeah, yeah. And then she
Wow.
got a phone call from the police actually after that. But yeah,
Wow. Wow. Well,
God is
sometimes
good.
the
God is good.
craziest
That's all I
things,
can
yeah,
say.
and sometimes the craziest adversity is what actually anchors our faith even more significantly.
Yeah.
So, Tom, tell me, how has God ever surprised you with the way that He's used you to influence others for Him?
Yeah. Wow. So love the question, and I love to think about God in terms of all the ways that He has surprised me. So one would be we've been talking about evangelism a little bit. So this was there's actually two things I'm thinking of, but one is so the first one is so I was the senior class president of my public high school in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And at our 20-year reunion, I actually decided to, I felt like God was calling me to step up my evangelism around my class reunion. So bottom line, Luke, was I had everybody's physical address, and I sent out 350 front and back 8 by 11 stories, testimonies of my life of how I came to Christ.
Wow.
I put them in the mail. I was a little nervous when I did it because, like these are my friends from when I grew up and what are they going to think of me or whatever. But I felt like God was asking me to do it. Yes, Lord, I'll do it. So I sent them out. Well, within 2 weeks, I got 30 email responses.
Wow.
Most of them said, "You didn't know this about me, Tom, or we wouldn't have talked about it. But when I got your thing in the mail, I had to tell you what God has done in my life."
Yeah.
And I was so encouraged by all these responses. And suddenly now I have these connections with these believers, right? Like, no idea. And then there's all the people that I didn't know about that didn't send me anything, right? So 5 years later at the next reunion, I got an email back and the guy said, "Hey, Tom, I wanted to tell you and never did, but meant to. But 5 years ago, my wife and I were going through a really hard time. We were about ready to get a divorce. And I got
Mm.
your letter in the mail." And God opened up my heart to the reality that He exists again. And it changed me. And I got back together with my wife, and we're doing great now. So,
Wow.
and then the other guy said, he said, "I wanted to tell you what happened. I got your letter in the mail. I wasn't a Christian. But God used your letter, and I was in a truck stop the next week, and I saw a book on the Bible, and I knew right then and there that I needed to become a Christian, and I became a Christian."
Wow.
So, and I heard this 5 years later. So in other words, what else did God do? It totally shocked me. I
Yeah.
thought maybe when I sent those things out, maybe one or two people might say, "Hey, thanks." I didn't know, but it turns out God used it in a huge way,
Yeah.
so that's one thing. And then the other thing is that, or the thing that happened in Thailand was I was doing street ministry here in Indianapolis. And when I got to Thailand, I thought, hey, there's a lot of people there. There's a lot of international people coming to visit Chiang Mai. I'm just going to continue going out to the night market, and I'll just share my faith. God totally surprised me on this one. The second time I went, a student from Grace, he emailed me, I think, and he said, "Mr. Miyakawa, I heard that you go down to the night market. Can I come with you?" And this was actually one of my son's friends. And I was like, "Yeah, that'd be great." Because normally I just go by myself. And so TJ Greason came with me that night. Next week, there were like 4 of us.
Yeah.
And so TJ invited some friends, and suddenly, within a couple of weeks, couple of months, we had like 15, 20 kids from the school that came down with me. I had no idea. This wasn't my plan at all. It was God's plan. And then last year when I left, I think last year, the year before, we usually had about 40 kids come down to the night market. These are like kids who are age 13 to 18, and they're going out in the market and sharing their faith in groups of like 3 or 4 students
Yeah.
with people. Some of these kids, English is their second language. Like, are you kidding me?
Mm.
But this is what God did with that.
And it
So
just started with you saying,
absolutely,
I'm going to be faithful to share
yeah.
myself, one person, and God adds another, and then adds 4 more, and then 10. And yeah.
And so hundreds of students, middle school and high school, have had the experience of sharing their faith. I had no idea God was going to do that. So, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Tom, just wanted to wrap up our time together just with a couple more questions for you, but just one last one as we, kind of thinking ahead. A question that I know I love to ask people who say, yeah, I'm choosing to follow Jesus is simply this. If you could do anything for the kingdom of God,
Mm.
looking forward, and you knew you wouldn't fail, what would you do?
Ooh, wow. These are great questions.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you. It's fun to talk about it. Wow, good question. Well, I think off the top, my first thought on that is a bit different than it would have been a few years ago for sure. So in my 50s now, answering that question looks different. But I have to say now generically at a super high level, um, there's no question that I don't want to do anything that's outside of what God wants me to do. So and I say that because I think I've done some things in life where um, I I can look back and see that maybe maybe it was a ministry that I did that was going to be really enjoyable. I'm trying to think of some examples here. Um, but maybe there was just a sense that it's still a bit about me. I don't want to do that anymore, So I don't want to forge something out that isn't God's plan. Like I said, what I desire the most for my life is that God can tell me I had this plan and you were faithful in saying yes along the way, and we accomplished everything that I set out to do.
Mm.
So I want God to say that in the end, not that, and then you tried to do some different things that weren't in my plan,
Yeah.
I just want to seek God and know his plan and then carry it out. There will
Yeah.
be nothing better. Okay. Having said that, so what would be tempting was that, so I have a friend, a very dear friend in Kenya, and he is in a really challenging place. I got to visit him. My daughter and I went to visit him last summer. He's in the middle of Kenya, 5 hours north of Nairobi. And if God called me to go serve there with him, me and my wife, I would love to say that would be my first answer to your question, kind of in the excitement of it, Luke, is, boy, I'd love to go to Kenya, and do this and that. But now I'm not going to say that because it's exciting. I'm an adventuresome person, so I like to do fun things, but it may not be God's plan. So
Mm.
I truly, it's like Psalm 131 that says, I do not concern myself with things too great or too wonderful for me. In other words, wanting to do something just for me that's bigger, not bigger, but just different than what God wants. No, that's assuming that I can do something that God may not want me to do or something like that. So I just want to do God's will. I truly want to do God's will. And that final thing on that is I want to love people. I really want to love people. And so I'm realizing in my recent years that loving people means less of what we do, for sure, and more of how we do it.
Hmm.
So I can get to the end of my life and have a bunch of bullet point things that I did in
Mm.
my life, evangelism, being a missionary, whatever else, discipling people, whatever. And that on paper looks a certain way. But I know in my heart of hearts that every single conversation that I have with somebody, every time I pray for somebody, it's not about the what, it's about the how. So I'm loving somebody in a moment by really listening to them well, for instance, okay? And, I think people could tell me, do I do a good job listening to you,
Hmm.
right? Do I do a good job being in the moment with you? Or am I kind of looking over you? You ever been in church where you're in a conversation and you see somebody else, that you really want to talk to?
Yes. Yeah.
I confessing my sins here, but God is calling me to turn and reshift my position and really invest in that person in that moment, because I heard it put by somebody in Thailand, 90% of the way that ultimately we love people, Luke, is by caring about them and being interested in them.
Hmm.
I can tell you that I care about you and that I love you and whatever, but if you sense that I'm not really interested in what you're telling me, then I'm not really loving you,
Hmm.
you know? So to answer your question, I want to be faithful and successful for the rest of my life in the how of how I relate to people, much more than going to Africa.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Man, Tom, thank you so much for joining us and being with us today. Just a question, if people wanted to connect with you, how could they follow up and touch base with you?
Yeah. So, wow, probably 3 or 4 different ways, but I'm on Facebook a lot. So, yeah. So Miyakawa. Yeah. Tom
Tom Miyakawa.
Miyakawa. Anybody can reach out to me. I love meeting new people. I will even offer out, like, if somebody just wants to have a chat so I can get to know you and pray for you. If somebody would just, hey, you don't know me, but I'm a friend of Luke Crawford's. Hey, anybody that's a friend of Luke Crawford's deserves my time. So I would love to do that. I'm not just saying that flippantly. Like, I would
Mm,
love to do that.
mm,
So yeah, absolutely. That's
yeah.
that's the best way.
Awesome. Well, hey, Tom, thank you so much for your time with us. Like, really appreciate what you've had to say, and I'm confident there's tons we can learn from and apply. So thank you.
You're so welcome, Luke. You are. I wish I was in your shoes right now, a little bit younger, and in the lives of and being a pastor and doing what you're doing. And I just appreciate your heart. We actually haven't spent a ton of time together, but I feel very close to you because of who you are and the spirit that God has given you. So thank you. And it's
Awesome.
been a lot of fun today. So
Man,
thanks.
thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Tom.